Welcome everyone to the 2016 Anderson Lecture on the Graphic Arts, which this year is supported by a generous donation from the Harry W. and Mary Margaret Anderson Charitable Foundation. My name is Karin Breuer, and I am curator in charge of the Achenbach Foundation for Graphic Arts, the Department of Prints and Drawings for the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. I'd like to begin by thanking my colleague, Achenbach curator Colleen Terry, for organizing all aspects of tonight's presentation, including wrangling our four panelists, who are all active printmakers and who are or were printers for the artist Ed Ruscha. In 1973, Ed Ruscha famously said, "I don't consider myself a printmaker with a capital P. I consider myself an artist with an A." As a curator of prints and drawings, I've always considered that an important statement. It's true about him and about many other contemporary artists who integrate printmaking into their overall art making. I took Ed's statement to heart when considering how best to present an exhibition celebrating the Ed Ruscha Editions archive, which our museums acquired in year 2000. It turns out to have been a no-brainer for me when an artist like Ed Ruscha is being able to be presented, because Ed is as adept at printmaking and photography as he is at painting. Those of you who have seen the exhibition Ed Ruscha and the Great American West have no doubt observed how the artist presents certain subjects and themes in a variety of media: prints, paintings, drawings, photographs, artist books, over the course of 50 years, and how easily they integrate on a gallery wall, sometimes despite huge size discrepancies. Like many American artists, Ed Ruscha was in the right place at the right time, Los Angeles, California, during the so-called American printmaking renaissance of the early 1960s, when traditional techniques such as lithography and etching were being refashioned for contemporary artistic practice. Tamarind Lithography Workshop and later Gemini GEL and Sirius Editions in Southern California and Crown Point Press in the San Francisco Bay Area were among the pioneers. Ruscha was invited to work at all these presses and created some of the most iconic prints of the era during short and long-term residencies. To date, Ed Ruscha has nearly 500 print editions to his credit, and he shows no sign of stopping. It's not a surprise for an artist who have said of printmaking, "I've always liked it. I've always had a good time making prints, and the people I've worked with have always been very interesting." So without further ado, let's meet some of these interesting folks. I'm going to introduce them one by one. Ed Hamilton, who is to my left, was born in Tucson, Arizona, and received his MFA in printmaking at the University of Arizona. He met Ed Ruscha in 1968 at Tamarind Lithography Workshop in Los Angeles, where he was a Tamarind printer fellow, and Ruscha was an artist fellow. Ed Hamilton became a Tamarind master printer in 1970, and he joined Sirius Editions that same year, working at the Los Angeles Press until 1974. From 1974 to 1989, he was a printer at June Wayne's studio. Wayne, you may remember, was the founder and director of Tamarind. In 1990, Ed Hamilton co-founded Hamilton Press in Venice, California, as a press that specializes in hand-printed lithographs. For over 25 years there, he has published lithographs by artists, including most recently Mark Licari, Jonas Wood, Kenny Scharf, and Ed Ruscha. At the far end of the table is Jacob Samuel. Jacob was born in Los Angeles and went to art school in the Bay Area, where he trained as a photographer. A brief stint at a commercial etching shop in Santa Monica gave him the background he needed to print etchings, and in 1980 he began working in etching at Gemini GEL in Los Angeles with artists Richard Serra, Michael Heiser, Ellsworth Kelly, and Via Selmans. In 1981, Sam Francis hired him to be his etching printer at the Litho Shop, where he printed 120 color aquatints for the artist. Jacob also worked at Lapis Press, Francis's book publishing imprint, and it is there that he first worked with Ed Ruscha. In 1988, Jacob established his own imprint, Edition Jacob Samuel, in Santa Monica, where he printed and published small format etchings in series by artists including Chris Burden, Barry McGee, and Mangechi Mutu. In 2010, LACMA and the Hammer Museum jointly acquired Editions Jacob Samuel and its archive. I'm sorry, that's not right. They didn't acquire Editions Jacob Samuel, they acquired your archive. And in 2015, MoMA New York acquired the complete publications of the press. Recently, Editions Jacob Samuel ceased its publishing program, and Jacob began Green Dolphin Street, a new imprint. Next to Jacob is the only woman on our panel, but an important one nevertheless, Renée Bott. Renée was born in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and grew up in Newton, Massachusetts. In 1981, she earned a BFA from UMass Amherst with a focus on printmaking. After spending 2 years in Seattle, Renée relocated to Oakland to attend graduate school at CCAC, as it was then called. In 1985, Renée joined Crown Point Press, then located in Oakland and founded by Karin Breuer as a press that specialized in etching. It was at Crown Point in 1988 that she first worked with Ed Ruscha during his second visit to Crown Point. The first was in 1982. By then, the press had moved from Oakland to San Francisco and was celebrated for its work with an international group of artists. In 1996, Renée left Crown Point to join Pam Paulson in forming Paulson Bott Press, which recently celebrated its 20th anniversary. Ed Ruscha has returned to Crown Point several times to produce editions of etchings since his first visit there. All 39 of his etchings that he has made at Crown Point were recently on view in the Crown Point Gallery in a show titled Made in San Francisco, Ed Ruscha Etchings. And last but not least, Shaye Remba was born in Mexico City and graduated from the Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana with a degree in mechanical engineering. He studied photography for 2 years at La Casa del Lago in Mexico City and spent time backpacking around the world. In 1986, Shaye moved to Los Angeles and began working at Mixografia, the printing and publishing workshop that his parents had founded in Mexico City in the 1960s. His background in engineering allowed him to develop and invent new processes and machinery for paper making and creating printing plates, as well as to refine Mixografia's unique three-dimensional printmaking technique. During his time at Mixografia, Shaye has worked closely and developed working relationships with artists such as John Baldessari, Alberto Burri, Helen Frankenthaler, Jason Martin, Analia Saban, Frank Stella, Donald Sultan, and Ed Ruscha, among many more. Please welcome them tonight. Each of our panelists is going to present a brief slide presentation of the projects, or a special project that they've worked on with Ed Ruscha over the years. And I've asked Ed Hamilton, who's worked with Ed the longest, to begin our discussion.
Well, first of all, it wasn't my idea to call it Hamilton Press. Ed Ruscha insisted on that. Okay. I get asked quite often to explain Ed Ruscha's prints to people. Ed Ruscha gets asked quite often to explain. For instance, this question mark. If someone were to ask him, what is this all about, he would say something like, oh, I really like that dot. And if they were to come up with some idea of what their version of the print would be, they'd say something like, oh, that's really heavy. You're asking to question humanity or something like that. And Ed would say something like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. And so the point being, of course, that Ed wants everybody to bring their own experience to the print, to interpret it their own way. My interpretation of this, of course, is because Ed had given me a piece of pastel Kleenex to match the color for this. So my interpretation is these are drops on a piece of Kleenex. Of course, he had something else in mind. But this was done at Cirrus in 1971, and it's rubbing crayon on stone. Same as this. This is Vanish of 1973. There were a series of 5 different drop prints that we did at that time. Pick, Pan, and Shovel, also done at Cirrus. Sea of Desire was done at June Wayne's studio in 1984. Heaven, Halfway Hell. This was folded into and tipped into Parquet magazine. Coyote of 1989. Yesterday's Treasures, one of many prints that he has done in collaboration with other artists. This is done in '89 with Joe Good. Sure is one of a box set of 12 prints, 1989. These were meant to be somewhat like a book, but an unbound book. Of course, when people buy them, they want to frame them, which completely destroys the concept of taking them out, looking at them close up, without glass in front of them. V of '89. Question. This is OK State 1 and OK State 2. These were all done at June Wayne's studio. The Cruiser was done in collaboration with Kenny Scharf. In 1990, this was printed at Hamilton Press. And when Ed had me proof this, he asked me to show it to Kenny and tell Kenny he can do anything he wants to on top of this, which I thought was a rather extraordinary thing for him to say. This is the end of 1991. Ed wanted to scratch, and so I gave him a large piece of exposed film so that he could scratch into the film. Teepees of 1992, this is one of a series of 6 called Cameo Cuts. Telephone of 1992, one of a series of 8 called Archiprops. Safe of 1991, there's a collaboration with Raymond Pettibone. When Raymond did his, the hand, it was either, he said, either the hand of God or Jackie Robinson's hand. He didn't know which one. And Ed did Safe. Raymond isn't exactly very careful when he draws. There are a lot of drips. When Ed did the Safe, he very carefully put red dots in to correspond in relationship with Raymond's splats. This is Oxford Beverly Western of 1999. It's a diptych. Roadmaster of 2003. This was the streaks that you see there are done with the roller before it's smoothed out. So each one of the prints in this was unique. This is the end, done in collaboration with Raymond Pettibone in 2003. The Holy Bible of 2003. This is, I think, extraordinary also because it's kind of a trompe-l'oeil effect that Ed was very good at extraordinary detail in this, and his sense of humor is that the Holy Bible was floating over the surface of this material. He once again asked me to show Raymond the proof and to tell him that he could draw on top of this if he wanted to, on top of the Holy Bible. And I was just trying to think of another example of another artist that would say something like that. You know, like maybe Picasso doing the Minotaur and saying to Miro, go ahead and do anything you want to on top of it. It doesn't make sense. This is the Course of Empire that Ed did in relation to a show at the Venice Biennale. Landmark Decay of 2006, printed from a stone. There and Here, State 2 of 2007, Bliss Bucket 2010, Jet Baby 2011, Periods 2013. I got tired of referring to this as years, months, weeks, so forth, and asked Ed if we could change the title to Periods, which I thought was appropriate because of the periods of time and the periods after these abbreviations. And then I realized when some of our female collectors were rather alarmed when I told them I was printing periods. This is Wall Rocket of 2013, History Kids 2013, and Sponge Puddle 2015.
These are all lithographs, and it seems to have been a favorite medium for Ed Ruscha, probably because it was one of his early introductions to professional printmaking, or at least printmaking with a professional printer. But in the 1980s, he turned his attention to etching, and one of the first professional printers he worked with was Jacob Samuel. So Jacob, I'm going to turn this over to you and have you talk about
It doesn't appear that
That's
way.
fine.
Oh, sorry.
No, no problem.
Okay.
So do you want to, I don't know. Is this working? Yeah. Okay, this little computer shows me coming up next, so it's not like I'm trying to take away the limelight here. Okay, so that's me, Renée Bott. This is Hourglass. It's a fairly large etching, and Ed, when he came to the studio at Crown Point Press in 1988, was working in soap ground, which I don't know if you all are familiar with this phenomenon in print shops, but what happens is a shop will discover a new technique, and suddenly every artist that comes through there has to try it. And so Ed was given the soap ground, and the resulting 3 prints were really beautiful examples of soap ground. I think of all the artists that I worked with using soap ground, Ed was a master of that. So this is Hourglass and Heaven. Again, mostly using soft. These are very simple. This is 2-plate etching. He blocked out the word heaven on both plates and just used soap ground. And we did a couple blends of ink to create that sort of heavenly look. And Hell. But the best part about Heaven and Hell is that just recently when Ed was here for the opening, Karin reintroduced me to Ed, and it has been 28 years since these were made. And she said, Ed, do you remember working with Renée Bott? And he said, yeah. I mean, he had a little look. It's been a while. And I said, Ed, we made heaven and hell together. And he said, now that's a line I want on my bio. So there's Ed in 1988, and he's standing, I think that's Connie Llewellyn, in the studio, and you can see on the far wall the rooster print that we were working on. So we made these 3 soap ground etchings that were all very simple, and then we started to experiment with an airbrush and etching using shellac as a blockout, and we ended up making these really beautiful prints. The jockey, and to get the soft edge, we had to make 2 plates. He had to spray basically with an invisible blockout on an aqua tint. It was impossible to see, but we managed to get it to work. And then this next one is rooster, very beautiful print with a water bite in the background. Again, we had to make 2 different rooster plates just to get that soft edge, because it was the first time that we had used an airbrush with blockout, as far as I know, with making etchings. And then later, Pam Paulson and I had the pleasure of working with artists using the airbrush, and we found out that asphaltum's way easier, FYI. So here's a photo of Ed in front of that wall with the rooster, and that's all.
I think Jacob's next.
Actually, I think Shaye's next.
Confused.
Okay.
You just press that.
Yeah. Okay, I am Shaye Remba, and I am part of Mixografia, which is a workshop that specializes in three-dimensional prints. And by three-dimensional, we mean high relief and or fine surface detail. So I will show a short chronology of how we approached one project with Ed Ruscha, which is part of one of the prints is at the end of the show. It's called Dead End, but this will chronology the way we did the Rusty Sign series. So everything started with Ed asking us, could you print something that looks like rust? Because always whenever we have we approach him, he always asks, could you do this, could you do that? Because our printmaking technique, let's say, is non-traditional. So for us, it's always yes to the artist, because we like the challenge, and this way we expand our vocabulary as a workshop and also the language of the artist. So from this question about making something that looks like rust, we developed this print, or this is one of the series that is called For Sale. So in order to create that, we produced a three-dimensional printing plate that is being inked by one of our master printers. You know, all the colors are applied at once. Then after the inking is done, we make our own handmade paper, which is cotton paper. And in the case of the rusty sign, we added pigment to the pulp until we achieve this dark color. So what we do, we take the printing plate, which is inked like that. We apply the handmade paper. We run it through the press with lots of pressure, and the combination of the dark pulp and the inking produce this print, which the relief is the calligraphy that Ed designed for the print. And this is like a close-up where you can really see the crust or the scale of the metal, which in Ed's mind is telling us a history of a sign which belongs to a certain place. So he really is talking about a landscape that becomes a conceptual landscape. This is another close-up of one of this print. And the print that is on the show is Dead End 2. And Ed was very specific about the bullet holes and the slot to hang the sign. He's always very meticulous about place where how the image is constructed, and these are the type of interactions that we had with him, and most of the time with every artist, trying to put on a piece of handmade paper a three-dimensional concept. Here, this is at Ed's studio, signing the prints, which is the last step, once we finish printing. Another project that we did is the Ghost Station, and also this started as a question by him, a simple question. He asked, do you think you could do like a white print? So in theory, that sounds much simpler than a print full of color. And for us, we thought, yes, we can do that. And once we got moving, let's say, the project, we realized that everything, we had to clean every piece of equipment. The pulp, we had like to carefully look for impurities in order to produce a crisp white print. Also, the paper required like a certain thickness because we didn't want it to warp, because then the image is totally destroyed. And Ed, his intention was really creating an image that is light and shadow, and the shadow is, by projecting the light, is what creates the image. And we think that's why he called it like Ghost Station, and is probably it really looks at the soul of all these standard station that he has been creating throughout his career. Here is Ed at the shop looking at the plate. And here we are lifting the print of the plate after it went through the press. Another very interesting project we did with him is this called New Wood, Old Wood, which really deals with the passing of time. We question which one is the new wood, which one is the old wood. One looks new, one looks old, but really at the end, the new wood is the one that looks old and weathered, because that's like the present. And in order to produce that, we produced for him some soft models of these wood planks that he brought from his ranch close to Big Bear in Southern California. And then the original plank had like a crack. And basically everything was working with a crack. For the piece that looks new, he closed the crack. And for the one that looks old, he opened up the crack and buckled it a little bit, and that was it. That was like his intervention for his concept. Here he's looking at it, comparing the prints. Once we had some color proofs of it, but everything started with those little pieces of soft material. And here you see, in order to make them look really like wood planks, we made a piece of handmade paper as the background and then attached the prints with the color to it. So this is like what looks like old wood. And this is what looks like the new wood. And if you look carefully, it's the same plank. You know, the knots, all the grain is basically the same, just different colors. This is one more time. And another project which we are showing here is the part of the Petro plot series. This was done when he was doing all the maps. And he wanted to, because of the three-dimensional possibilities that the Mixografia can offer, he approached them as petroglyphs, you know, like going back on time. This is the detail, you know, the grain of the stone. This actually was like Arizona flagstone, which we work on, and this is another print. And I am going, let's say, the chronology is backward. This is one of the first projects we did with him. And he brought, in order to create the model, he brought grasses from also his ranch that he wanted to integrate into this image of a clock. So that's it.
Okay. Hello. Okay, so I was working for Sam Francis, and he started Lapis Press to make limited edition books in the European style, using etchings and lithographs, and occasionally texts either by the artist or by poets. You know, really very influenced by jazz, by Matisse, and by also the great publishers from the 20s and 30s and 40s in Paris, who worked with artists and writers making these livres d'artistes, these very deluxe editions. Sam had spent a lot of time in Europe, and so he wanted to do that in California. So first project we did with Richard Long, and then we did one with Sam, and then he knew Ed, and I think actually Ed worked for Sam like as long as it takes to get a cup of coffee or something back in the 60s, you know, so they had a relationship, and he invited Ed to come into the studio and to make a book. So Ed came to the studio and he told me about what he was doing, these silhouette pieces like we saw that Ed printed a while back, and so I went, well, that's pretty straight up, that'll be easy to do. And so he took me down to his studio and he showed me the paintings, and I said, this is really a no-brainer, man, we'll just use an airbrush. And I had this terrific asphaltum. Renee mentioned about airbrush with asphaltum. There was an asphaltum that was made in England by a company called Roberson, which has been there for a couple hundred years, and it was called Rhines Quick Drying Etching Varnish. And it was ether-based, so it dried immediately when it hit the plate. And so you could really control it. There were never any drips. So I thought, well, why don't you just make a mask, and we'll use the airbrush, and we can make a halation all in one plate, and it should be pretty straight up. So we did it, and I thought it came out perfect. I was really, really pleased with it. And he looked at it and he went, yeah, it's really nice, sure. And then I said, well, I got another idea. Why don't we try this? So we did another airbrush thing with an open bite. And I thought the halation would look pretty cool with that, because you get a nice lip with an open bite. And I printed it with white ink on black paper so that it kind of had a charcoal gray look against this black sky. And it was tight, it was pristine, and I thought it was a killer print. And he looked at it, and he said, have you ever printed black on white? And, and so I went, I've done that a few times. So, and then I didn't hear from him. He left, and I didn't know if the thing was just sort of in limbo. And then he calls me up and he goes, I have an idea. And I said, what? And he says, well, I'm going to bring it by. And he took the material that you line tennis courts with, and he cut out these shapes out of this green plastic weave. And he said, what about if you make a soft ground, and I put these on top of it, and I beat it with a ball-peen hammer? And I was a little shocked, because I was trying to do something like really tight and refined, you know, and he was not interested at all. And so that was a great, great lesson in working with Ed Ruscha. So this is the project here. This is what they call the broadside, which is a very traditional thing in printing, you know, books or limited edition books. There would be a print that went with it that would have the title of the book and the artist and the publisher, and it was a very traditional thing to do. And so all the Lapis books we did a broadside. I don't know the significance of the letter B, but I do think it is a interesting letter form. So here we go. We're going to run through these pretty quick. So the main shape is the shape that he cut out of green plastic weave, and the marks that are uneven are where he hit it harder with a hammer. And then the background was just a bunch of funky stuff that we did. It's 88. I can't really remember all the stuff that we did, but it was all very funky. And there was one thing that you'll see coming up here. Yeah, so he would take sandpaper and just drag it across a soft ground or a hard ground, and then print it underneath this image of a shoe and a boot. And the coyote, which is an iconic Ed image, that was just taking sandpaper and just laying it on real quick and hitting it with his hands, kind of, you know, with the palms of his hands, and then printing on top of that another piece of plastic weave. I'm telling you, I could not believe the guy was into this stuff. I was floored, because if you look at the stuff Ed Hamilton printed with him, it's so tight and so gorgeous. And so I really wanted to emulate that. So I was shocked. And this time he took the sandpaper and he put it on the plate, and he like twirled it in a circle, and he got that pattern. And then we did the boat, and he really liked that crack on the bottom. And I said to him when he did it, I said, Ed, you know, I can take that out very easily. I can just stop that out because it's going to look weird. And he said, no, it'll be fine. And this house here is interesting, and that's another sand. I guess they're all sandpaper, the backgrounds. And I like this one a lot because it's got an extra plate in it, you know, the red plate, and it looks pretty good, the dancing woman or the hostess or whatever. So that's 2 plates, red and black. And then this is 3 plates. It's got a transparent base underneath it I think he actually took the plate on this one, a hard ground plate, put it face down in a parking lot and stepped on it. This one's 3 plates. It's the tightest one we did. I was a little shocked that the last one he wanted to do would actually be so tight, but I think it came out rather lovely. And so it's 3 pieces of tennis court material hammered on to the plate. This is a print we did 10 years later, and it was a single print, and it's kind of interesting because it's an aqua tint reversal. So what that means is he used the airbrush again and set it to a very coarse setting, and did the plate with the hard ground, and then I just inked it up and transferred it to another plate, and then aqua tinted that, and that's how we got the reversal. And the lines are on a separate, the words are on a separate plate, and that was just pretty straight up, you know, traced it in hard ground and then aqua tinted it. I like the print a lot. I'll tell you, he's such a funny guy. He said when we finished his print and he signed it, he said, "They're all alike." And I said, well, that was what we were supposed to do, right? And he went, "Yeah, but they're all alike." He's really funny. And so here we go to this other thing. This is another strange deal he did with me. Because the thing is, he like acts like he doesn't know what he's doing, but he really knows what he's doing. So he comes over to the shop, and he's got this craft paper that he's cut out into this sign. And he said, how about if we do an aqua tint, and we lay the craft paper on top, and you melt the aqua tint, and then when it's melted, you take the craft paper off, like with the tweezers, and then etch it, and then you'll have this nice aqua tint with this blank space. And so there's a little bit of a lip on the open bite, but you know, with wiping it with your finger, you can get rid of that. You can get rid of that lip. So, and then he made a second plate that was hard ground. That was the first one we did. He's done this image a number of times, and he showed me the photograph. These aren't, he's not inventing these things. Just like with Shaye, he's finding an object and he wants you to work with that object. And with these, he had photographs of signs that he took out in the desert, and so he cut out these shapes based on these signs. And there's another sign, and there's another sign. And that's all the work that I did with Ed Ruscha. That's 3 projects in over 3 decades. And I have a little Ed Ruscha story to tell you that happened today as we wind it up. We're out on Highway 5, and my wife and I driving up. And I said, why don't you put on some music? And, Highway 5 is Ed Ruscha in the American West. It's limitless, endless landscapes with horizons way out there. And it's pretty desolate, it's pretty bleak. It has an aesthetic of its own, and we happen to like it. And so she put on Speedy West, who's a steel guitar player from the 50s that I imagine Ed is quite familiar with. And on the display on the little digital display thing, the name of the track was Motel Life Again. And I thought, Ed Ruscha in the American West.
Thanks, Jacob. And thank you all for great presentations. I'm going to open it up for a few minutes of questions, and I'm going to ask the first question, and I'm hoping it'll stimulate conversation and maybe some more questions amongst you all. But isn't it true, we all want to know what it's like to work with Ed Ruscha. He's known and he's been identified as the nicest artist ever, even by his fellow artists who say that there's no one who doesn't like Ed Ruscha. So what's he like to work with? What's the studio atmosphere when Ed Ruscha is in the room?
Well, what I find important about Ed is that, I've worked with a lot of artists and in a very competitive mode, and Ed isn't competitive. And it isn't just that, he doesn't ever say anything negative about any artist or any of their works. And it's quite the opposite, actually, that he has this respect for other artists. And you can see that in all of these collaborations that he's had with other artists in a lot of different media. And I think that respect is significant in Hamilton Press because it kind of defines what we're all about. And I think all of us have a great respect for the artists that we work with. At Hamilton Press, it's also Ed Ruscha's respect that he gives to other artists.
Well, Ed is a very focused person. It's right to work with an artist that, let's say, before you start a project, he has a very clear idea of what he wants, because since ourselves as printers, we are collaborating with them, we are really working their concept. So as long as everything is clear, we know what to do. And some artists, sometimes they have some difficulty making up their mind, but this is not the case with Ed. Always, as you say, very respectful, very funny, all these attributes. He has an incredible sense of humor, and all the staff at his studio, they are also great. It's like, everybody is involved, trying to help in any way they can.
Like I said, it was in 1988. It was a long time ago. But Ed, like Shaye said, was very clear when things weren't working. And that makes a printer's job very easy. So we actually ended up making soap ground plates that he would look at and go, what happened there? And I'd be like, well, he'd say, just get rid of it. So, and this happened, we made a house image with this airbrush, and that got rejected. He just took one look at it. And it didn't help that the ink stuck, and we pulled the paper off, and half the print was stuck to the ink. And, you know, I was trying to salvage it by peeling it back, and he was just like, no, that's not going to work. So right away, the clearness really makes a difference. But I always felt like he was very easygoing, lovely, just lovely to be in his presence, and also the fact that there was this clarity in his vision that made it just really obvious what our job was to do. And it was a joy. His sense of humor was hilarious. After our project was over, he sent us a present, and the present was a video cassette of these. It was sort of like, you know, back in the days when you'd listen to National Lampoon. It was a Lampoon spoof of these two engravers who were making counterfeit money. It was pretty funny.
That's really funny. He gave me a cassette tape by Bob and Ray. Yeah, really funny. Yeah, he's like a combination of the most straightforward, honest person you could ever work with a guy who's a total enigma. I mean, he's got both things going at once. And he knows what he wants. He's very similar to John Baldessari, who I've done quite a bit of work with as well. In that Baldessari and Ed both have an idea of what they want, and you just execute. And it's not like you're in there to experiment or to figure it out. They know what they want, and you execute.
Well, you've all spoken about the fact that he typically comes into your respective studios with a premeditated idea, either for an image or for utilization of a technique. But I can't imagine that, for example, Renée, he comes in and says, you know, I'm just itching to use soft ground on this project. Or soap ground or something like that.
Well, like I said, that this is a phenomenon that can happen in studios where, well, I thought it was interesting that you talked about the aquatint reversal, because that was something that we got very enthusiastic about using. And it seemed like for like 5 years, every artist had to try the aquatint reversal. This also happened with soap ground. It was just, we would have this medium, and it was relatively new to the press or to the studio. And it was a temptation to give it to the artist to see how they'd respond to it. And what was interesting about the soap ground etchings is they're really large. Those were large etchings. And he was able to cover a huge amount of the copper very quickly and easily, just like with a paintbrush, which I think made it a very successful project. I mean, the airbrush was much more fraught with problems. But the soap ground was a just quick, you know, and he did those plates in literally, 2 minutes of brushing, and that was done. What took more time was him blocking out the letters, like the heaven and hell, which both had to be put in exactly the same spot, which we all know how to do that as printers. But, he was the one who carefully blocked out those letters. And then 2 minutes later, it was ready to etch aquatint.
Well, let's talk about size a little bit, because Renée, you've worked with gigantic prints with him. Shaye at Mixografia, the old wood, new wood is a pretty large piece. Ed, I think at Hamilton Press, you have worked pretty large, but you've also worked relatively small as well. And Jacob, you've typically worked small format with him. Does he come in with an idea to work large or small, or does it sort of find its way given the studio that he's chosen to work in? How does he choose how big an image he's going to print?
With the first series, with the silhouettes, it was dictated by the format of the book. So it had to be, book size, and we weren't really into some sort of gigantic book that was not functional. So the format was dictated by the fact that it was going to be a book. And by the time I started my own imprint and was publishing, I just told people I only work small, and that's the way it is.
So did he come to you knowing that you work small and he was going to do some small prints?
Yeah.
Okay.
In our case, he chose the sizes. You know, the plank of wood, that's what he gave us. The grass, that's the grass that was the size of it.
It's life size.
It's life size, and that's as much grass as he wanted to use. For the rusty signs, he drew in pencil exactly how everything is. As I mentioned, the bullet holes, the punches that they have, round punches, you know, to hang the signs or the slots, everything was there. So it was totally of his, he chose that was his concept, and that's it.
Ed, how does it work for you?
Well, like you say, he works everything out in advance.
Does he use stones, or do you use
Stone, yeah.
plates? Stones and plates,
Both.
or both?
Yes. You know, those, especially the first ones that I showed you, the drops and vanish, all those were on stone. And he liked to do the cameo cuts because he could scratch into the stone. But on the mountain prints, he called up and wanted to know how wide he could go because they were square prints. And he wanted to have it as large as possible, but the width of the press determined what the size would be. But it's the proofing that was different in OK. That was the first time that he had tried to do a lot of different sorts of things that he didn't know in advance what it was that he wanted. So he gave me a whole list of different colors to try, and the reversal of the second state made another whole different. And in your collection, you have a huge number of color trial proofs. Mm-hmm. That's the first time that I'd ever had a lot of color trial proofs with him. In the mountain prints, once again, he wanted to see something over and over again. So there were a lot of color trial proofs there.
Have you found that true with all of you, that he likes to go through a color proofing process that can sometimes seem endless before he makes a decision?
Well, in our case, we go through color proofing because it's part of the game, you know, and the artists, in Ed's case, we always know what he wants, but he has to see it, and we as printers, we can make it happen in different ways. So that's what we do, present his concept in different ways, and then he picks up one, and that becomes the bon à tirer or good to print, and then we base the edition on that print.
With the Heaven and Hell and there were two prints that were primarily black and white. Rooster had a water-bite background, but there was not a lot of color proofing compared to some artists. I mean, Pam and I have worked with some artists that I think we probably pulled about 100 color proofs before we got the okay. So Ed was pretty quick. I mean, I think that has to do with the clarity of his vision, you know, and being a great communicator.
Yeah, like I said, he just told me what to do, and I did it. And so color-wise, that's it.
Well, we're actually approaching the end of the hour, and I'm told that there's going to be a very loud musical performance at 8 o'clock, so I want to wrap things up. But I want to open it up to you all and see if you have any questions for one another. Comments? Funny stories?
I think we're all really lucky that we have had this opportunity to work with Ed. It's it feels like a real honor for me. So.
It's not only an honor to work with Ed, but it's an honor to be up here with these great printers who I've admired for many years.
Well, same here.
It's like a club.
Thanks very much, everyone, for joining us tonight.